Thank you, and you may be seated if you have a chair. Or you sit on the ground. All right, once again, thank you for joining us for Carolina Day. We began earlier in the day. We had a good crowd at St. Michael's Church for the 10 o'clock service of Thanksgiving. It was very nicely done. Really appreciate the rector, Reverend Al Zadig, for offering the church and leading the service. And you really missed a treat with Bishop Fitz-Allison's homily at St. Michael's this morning. He did the usual fabulous job, and he's a dear friend of the Palmetto Society and of what we do on Carolina Day. So if you weren't there, you really missed it, and maybe you'll be able to make it next year. We are very fortunate in having Doug MacIntyre as our speaker this morning. Doug is an 11th generation South Carolinian. His family first came to South Carolina in 1675. About 3 years ago, Doug started, he had an interest in the Battle of Sullivan's Island that we remember this day, but he began to dig into the history of it, and because of his efforts and because of his research, he spearheaded the efforts of a group of citizens who developed Thompson Park, which opened last year at the Breach Inlet end of Sullivan's Island. That park is really dedicated primarily, though it covers the entire battle, including, interestingly, the role of Charleston in the American War of Independence. So it's not only about what happened on the north end of Breach Inlet, but it is that north end of the battle that so often gets overlooked. You know, we have our hero, Colonel Moultrie's statues, long overdue, is here on the battery. Of course, his man and hero, Sergeant Jasper, behind me, been honored, remembered for over 100 years now. But the other South Carolina colonel in the battle, Colonel William Danger Thompson, was in command of the forces at Breach Inlet. And that story gets overlooked, but it was a critical part of the battle that basically kept the Colonel Moultrie's back door from being used by the British Army to take the fort. I've said it before, but I think the nickname Danger Thompson, that had a great name for a military man. It's almost like an action figure or something, So anyway, with no further ado, we're going to hear more about Colonel Thompson and the battle and other aspects of our history from Doug MacIntyre. So please welcome Doug.
It is my privilege to be with you today and to share some of these little-known facts about the pivotal role played by our predecessors in this state, in this city, in the birth of our great nation. The technology revolution is enabling a history revolution, as information available to researchers is increasing daily. Today's historians, amateurs and professionals alike, have access to primary accounts written centuries ago that were not available to the early authors. These letters, diaries, pension applications, notes, accounts, maps provide new insights into the old history, and they give fascinating glimpses into the lives of the people who made that history. So let's take a fresh look at June 1776 in Charlestown, and some of the details that may be new to you as they were to me. Most of us know that the American Revolution began in 1775 as patriots in all the colonies, all 13 colonies, overthrew their British royal governments, and the armed rebellion began in Massachusetts. But few appreciate the crucial involvement of Charlestown in South Carolina in the 8-year struggle that produced the United States of America. An early turning point came on this day 236 years ago. The same day, Thomas Jefferson and his Committee of Five delivered the draft Declaration of Independence to the Continental Congress in Philadelphia. On June 28th, 1776, the British suffered an embarrassing, indeed a humiliating defeat in the Battle of Sullivan's Island. Patriots on opposite ends of that island defeated simultaneous attacks by the British Army and Navy to win one of America's first great victories. You might wonder why the British were attacking. They wanted to mobilize Loyalist support, and they wanted to take back the most important city in the South. The capital of South Carolina was the center of the rebellion here, and it was the commercial hub of the entire South. It had a busy port, lucrative trade. Charlestown was the richest city, and South Carolina was the richest colony in all British North America. 9 of the 10 most valuable estates probated on the eve of the Revolution were right here in the South Carolina Low Country. The British and Americans struggled for control of this wealth and this power throughout the entire Revolution. A large squadron, about 60 vessels, carrying more than 5,000 British soldiers and sailors, arrived in these waters on June 1st. Their plan was to take Sullivan's Island and later Charlestown. Their strategy called for the Navy under Commodore Peter Parker to bombard the Americans' Palmetto Log Fort from the sea, while the Army under General Henry Clinton crossed Breach Inlet between Long Island and Sullivan's Island to storm the fort from its unfinished and vulnerable rear. The British Army landed on Long Island, now the Isle of Palms, and the Navy anchored just outside Charleston Harbor to prepare for the battle. The 3,000 British regulars and loyalists on Long Island had powerful artillery and 3 dedicated warships. They faced a diverse band of 780 patriots on the Sullivan's Island side of the inlet, led by Colonel William Thompson, affectionately known as Danger. Thompson and most of his men were from off. His 3rd Regiment Rangers, the South Carolina Militia, they all came from the back country, on the other side of I-95. And today, we appreciate those of you who made the journey from the Midlands and the Upstate to honor our heritage on another sultry June 28th. The South Carolinians at Breach Inlet were joined by Continentals from Virginia and North Carolina, and Indians from the Catawba and affiliated tribes like the Cherokee and the Waccamaw and the PD. Slaves and at least 1 free black man served at Breach Inlet, and not only as laborers, but also as soldiers. The first combat casualty of the Battle of Sullivan's Island occurred about June 18th, when Thompson's men shot a British officer that was scouting Long Island. He was dressed in red, faced with black, and had a cockade and a feather in his hat and a sword by his side. That's how they knew he was an officer. The opposing armies at Breach Inlet then skirmished every single day leading up to June 28th. Men on both sides were wounded and killed in some fierce fighting while the British delayed the combined Army-Navy attack. The Americans moved cannons up to the inlet. They threw up small fortifications of palmetto logs out there. They strengthened their defenses so that General Clinton thought he was facing 3,000 or 4,000 men, quadruple the number he actually faced. The Patriots' imposing attitude and their entrenchments and the depth of the inlet and 10 days of combat convinced General Clinton that there was no way for his troops to reach Sullivan's Island without tremendous sacrifice. So despite tremendous numerical advantage, the British Army had been outmaneuvered. On the morning of Friday, June 28th, Colonel William Moultrie was at Breach Inlet conferring with his longtime colleague Thompson. They recognized the British signals for the combined assault. They'd been expecting it. Moultrie then galloped 3 miles back to the fort to rally his men, while Thompson and his men turned back 5 different British offensives. The British attacked across Breach Inlet with long-range cannons from a marsh and from an island on the marsh and from warships in the creek. They shot mortars and light artillery from behind an oyster bank at the edge of the inlet. They made a surprise musket attack from the marsh, and they attempted an amphibious crossing in rowboats. Thompson's men repelled every attack. Now today, Breach Inlet is an idyllic spot in a spectacular setting. It's a quarter-mile expanse of water between 2 resort islands on the Atlantic Ocean. The shoreline's among the most beautiful, and the land's among the most expensive in the state. That landscape was very different before accreting sand filled most of the inlet in the 19th century. In 1776, the Long Island shore was just this side of today's IOP connector and the Isle of Palms commercial district. Breach Inlet reached all the way from that shore to Sullivan's Island. That treacherous span of water was more than a mile wide. It was laced with creeks, sandbars, tidal pools, oyster banks, marsh, and pluff mud. And it was overlooked by very high sand dunes on both of those 2 wilderness islands. Next time you're out there, take a look at the Thompson Park exhibits and think about those British soldiers trying to fight their way across that wide expanse of water, struggling with the current, running aground on the sandbars, in 15 flat-bottom boats packed with 40 to 60 men each, slowly rowing toward a beach, defended by Patriot sharpshooters entrenched up to their eyeballs in the sand dunes, and led by this man named Danger. Richard Hudson, who was later the first intendant or mayor of Charleston, wrote that Thompson's cannon spread havoc, devastation, and death. A loyalist aboard one of the British warships in the creek beside Long Island said it was impossible for any set of men to sustain such a destructive fire as the Americans unleashed. One of Thompson's men responding to the musket attack recalled, "Our rifles were in prime order, well proved and well charged. Every man took deliberate aim at his object, and it really appeared every ball had fatal effect. The proportion which fell, never to rise again, was very great." Patriots' accounts said the British attempted to cross the inlet 2 or 3 times and continued firing all afternoon and into the night. At 10 p.m., the Americans had only 2 charges left for their big cannon, the 18-pounder. But the British never knew, and Clinton withdrew. A British soldier summarized in a letter to his brother, "They would have killed half of us before we could make our landing good." The action at Breach Inlet was out of sight and soon lost to history. But people here saw a scene that was awe-inspiring. As Colonel Moultrie rushed back from Breach Inlet, Charlestonians on the peninsula, looking out there,